With his heart in his hands, he held her face between his trembling hands, forcing her to look at him. "Eliza, look at me. Forget what they say. Forget the world outside. The only thing that matters is what is here, now." His voice was a thread of hope amidst the chaos, but her eyes, filled with an ancient pain, could only see the abyss that separated them. "How, sir? How can I forget?" Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The rain that fell over the Willow Creek Valley that late afternoon in 1880 seemed to have a personal vendetta against the world. Thick, persistent, it transformed the red earth of Oakwood Manor into a sticky quagmire where even the strongest horses trod with caution. Baron Arthur Elmeda, returning from a business trip to Riverside, felt the weight of exhaustion and the water that soaked his leather coat. At 45, a widower for 7 years, he carried a solitude that not even the vastness of his lands could fill. The solid wooden gate creaked, a familiar sound that would normally bring him a drop of relief, the certainty of being home. But not today. Today, something was different. A sharp sound, almost an animal's cry, cut through the noise of the storm and the nervous whinnying of the animals in the corral. Arthur pulled the reins of his black stallion, a majestic beast that obeyed only him. He strained his eyes, trying to see through the curtain of water, and then he saw it. Huddled near the fence, almost blending into the mud, a small figure, a bundle of rags that barely protected a trembling body. At first, he thought it was an injured animal, perhaps a stray calf. But the crying returned, stronger, unmistakably human. It was the cry of a baby. The Baron's heart, which he himself judged to be a stone, lurched. Without a second thought, he dismounted, his body sinking into the mud up to his ankles. With each step he took, the image became clearer. It was a young woman, almost a girl, her face smeared with dirt and tears. In her arms, wrapped in a cloth that had once been white, a newborn with pale skin and lips purple from the cold. The young woman raised her eyes when his shadow covered her. They were large, brown eyes, but they seemed to have seen a lifetime of disillusionment. The fear that shone in them was so palpable that Arthur stopped at a safe distance. He knew that look. It was the same look of cornered animals, of newly arrived servants who still didn't understand that here, at Oakwood Manor, things were different. He raised his hand, palm up, a gesture of peace. "Young woman, don't be afraid. I won't harm you." His voice came out deeper and hoarser than usual, muffled by the rain. She huddled even further, pressing the baby against her chest, an instinctive and desperate protective gesture. The tiny being began to cry again, a weak, suffering sound. That was what broke Arthur's hesitation. He approached slowly, kneeling in the mud, not caring about his expensive linen trousers or the dignity his position demanded. "He's cold, you both are. Come, let's go inside. The house is big, there's a fire and food." She didn't answer. She just stared at him, her chin trembling, torn between distrust and despair. He then saw her feet, bare, cut and purple. That girl had walked a long way. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. She swallowed hard, her chapped lips moving with difficulty. "Eliza." The word was a whisper, almost carried away by the wind. "Very well, Eliza. I am Arthur. And you and your child are not spending the night out here." He took off his own coat, heavy with rain, and placed it over her shoulders. The warmth of his body was still there, a minimal comfort, but it seemed to disarm her. She relaxed her shoulders, if only a millimeter, and the tears she had held back so fiercely finally rolled down, clearing 2 paths in the dirt on her face. Seeing that she no longer had the strength to fight her own exhaustion, he moved. With a care that would surprise all who knew him as a stern man, Arthur picked her up in his arms. She was frighteningly light, a bundle of bones and cold skin. The baby, nestled between them, let out a low whimper, but didn't cry anymore. Eliza, too exhausted to protest, simply rested her head on his broad chest. The smell of rain and horse filling her senses, a strange sense of security she hadn't known for a very, very long time. The door of the main house opened before he even reached the porch. The warm light of the chandeliers spilled over the threshold, revealing the imposing figure of Mars. White, the housekeeper, who ran the estate with the same rigidity she used in her grey hair bun. Beside her, Effie, the round-bodied cook with a soft heart, widened her eyes, her hand covering her mouth in a gesture of astonishment. The Baron entered, leaving a trail of mud on the polished wooden floor, and the silence that settled was heavier than the storm outside. Mrs. White's eyes scanned the scene. Her soaked employer, the dirty young woman in his arms, the tiny baby. The wrinkle of disapproval on her forehead deepened. "Sir, what is the meaning of this?" Her voice was a whip crack. Arthur ignored her. His gaze met Effie's. "Prepare a strong broth and some warm milk. Quickly, Effie." The cook, without batting an eye, nodded and disappeared towards the kitchen. Only then did he turn to the housekeeper. "Mars, White, have one of the maids prepare the back room, the one next to the oven. I want clean sheets and a fire in the fireplace. And find dry, warm clothes for her and the child. But, sir, a room in the main house. For these people." The housekeeper couldn't hide her disdain. "The storage shed is dry. We could—" "She's not an animal, White." Arthur's voice cut through the air, cold as steel. "And do not repeat a word of what I said. Just do it." The authority in his tone was unquestionable. Mars White swallowed the affront, her face a mask of contained fury, and left with heavy steps to carry out the order, not without first casting a venomous glance at the inert figure in her employer's arms. Arthur crossed the hall, passing by the portraits of his ancestors, whose oil-painted eyes seemed to judge him. Eliza, in a stupor of exhaustion, saw only blurs of gold and dark wood. He took her to the small room, a simple room used for unexpected guests or distant relatives, but which, with the heat of the kitchen oven next door, was the coziest place in the house that night. He gently placed her on the 4-poster bed, pushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "You are safe now," he said, more to himself than to her. Shortly after, Effie entered with a tray. She carried a steaming mug of broth, a glass of milk, and a plate with a piece of cornbread. Her eyes were kind, without the judgment Eliza had felt from the other woman. "Here, my dear. It will do you good. And a clean cloth, with warm water to clean the little angel." Eliza, still trembling, managed to sit up. Her hands barely had the strength to hold the mug. But hunger and cold were stronger than shame. As she drank the broth in small, desperate sips, Effie helped clean the baby's face and wrapped him in a soft wool blanket. The little one, feeling the warmth, finally stopped trembling and fell asleep, his breathing almost imperceptible. Arthur watched the scene from the doorway, without entering. The image of that mother, so young and fragile, caring for her child with fierce dedication, stirred something deep within him. He withdrew in silence and went to his study. He changed his wet clothes for a dry linen shirt and riding breeches, and poured himself a measure of aged whiskey. The alcohol did not warm the cold he felt in his soul. The flames of the fireplace danced, casting shadows on the bookshelves, filled with books he no longer had the desire to read. 7 years. 7 years since Helen had gone, taking with her the child who never breathed. The pain, which he thought he had buried under layers of work and silence, returned with overwhelming force. He saw Helen's face in Eliza's, the same vulnerability, the same silent strength. He saw in the sleeping baby the son he had cradled, already lifeless, before surrendering him to the earth. That night, the Baron did not sleep. The sound of rain beating against the window was an echo of the storm in his chest. Hours later, when the house was plunged into the deepest quiet, he got up. Driven by an impulse he couldn't explain, he walked barefoot down the cold corridor to the back room. The door was ajar. He peeked through the crack. In the faint light of a single candle, Eliza was sitting on the edge of the bed, cradling her son. She was humming a sad, old melody, a lullaby her mother had probably sung to her. The milk she barely had, the result of the little she had eaten, was enough to calm the little one. The Baron stood there, still in the shadow, observing that scene of pure resilience. In that humble room, a mother and child fought for life, oblivious to the world of wealth and rules that surrounded them. And Arthur Almeida, the man who thought he had lost the capacity to feel, knew that the arrival of that stranger in the storm was no accident. It was a reckoning with his own past. The next morning dawned lazily, the sky still grey and heavy, as if the previous night's storm had left a hangover in the air. The smell of wet earth and fresh coffee mingled at Oakwood Manor, an aroma that for Eliza was both strange and comforting. She awoke with the first pale rays of light filtering through the window of the small room. For an instant she didn't know where she was. The mattress was soft, the blankets heavy and warm, and the silence was broken only by the gentle breathing of her son, who slept beside her. His face finally flushed and serene. The memories of the previous day came rushing back, the rain, the mud, the fear, and then the face of a man whose eyes, though severe, did not contain the cruelty she had learned to expect. She sat up in bed, her whole body aching from the walk and the nights spent outdoors. The clothes she wore were not hers. Someone had left them on a chair beside the bed, a simple skirt of thick cotton and a long-sleeved blouse. Both warm but clean and warm. She felt a lump in her throat. That act of anonymous kindness was more than she had received in months. She dressed in silence, not knowing what to do next. Should she stay there, hidden, until they sent her away? Or should she go out and face the stares and whispers that surely awaited her? Her baby's hunger, as he began to stir, made the decision for her. With her son in her arms, she slowly opened the door. The corridor was empty. She followed the smell of coffee and the sound of low voices to the kitchen, a huge room with a wood-burning stove that occupied an entire wall and gleaming copper pots hanging. Effie had her back to her, stirring a large pot, while 2 younger maids, probably the housekeepers, chopped vegetables at a wooden table. The lively conversation died as soon as they saw her. The 3 pairs of eyes fixed on her, a mixture of curiosity and pity. It was Effie who broke the ice. Her face opened into a maternal smile. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well? And the little one, how is he?" She approached, her gaze lovingly falling on the child. "He looks like a different baby, thank goodness. Come, sit down. You must be starving." She pointed to a wooden stool near the stove. Eliza, still shy, obeyed. One of the maids handed her a mug of coffee with milk and a warm buttered roll. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while trying to discreetly nurse her son. Marez White is already up and with a sour face, whispered the other maid, whose name was Lucy. She didn't like it one bit that the master brought outsiders into the house. She said it never happened before. Mrs. White doesn't control the Baron's heart, Effie retorted firmly. He did what was right. To let a mother and child die in the rain, that would be a disgrace. Her tone made it clear the matter was closed. Eliza listened in silence, her heart heavy. She was the outsider, the cause of the discord. The bread seemed to weigh in her stomach. As soon as she finished eating, she stood up. "Thank you for the food. I need to find a way to thank the Baron, and be on my way." "Be on your way to where, child?" Effie held her arm, her voice soft but firm. "With that child in your arms and not a penny in your pocket. Be sensible. Baron Arthur is not a man to go back on his word. If he took you in, it's because he had a reason. Wait, try to be useful. Show that you were a worthy young woman." Effie's words were practical advice, but to Eliza, they sounded like a sentence. To be useful. It was what she had always tried to be. And yet, she had been discarded like a broken object. She just nodded, not knowing what to say. Effie seemed to understand her conflict. "Help the girls peel the potatoes. Keeping your hands busy helps your head from thinking foolishness." And that's what Eliza did. She spent the morning in the kitchen, helping with whatever she could, always with her son nearby, sleeping in a makeshift basket that Effie arranged. She was quick and skillful. She had learned household chores early on. The other maids, seeing that she was neither lazy nor arrogant, gradually relaxed, chatting with her about the trivialities of the estate. The Baron did not appear in the kitchen. Eliza learned from the conversations that he had left early for the fields, to assess the damage from the rain to the coffee plantation. She felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. She wanted to thank him, but she feared his gaze, the formality his position imposed, how to address such a powerful man, what to say. Her presence, however, did not go unnoticed by Mrs. White. The housekeeper passed through the kitchen constantly, with flimsy pretexts, her hawk eyes measuring Eliza's every move. She didn't speak directly to her, but her orders to the other maids were always harsher when Eliza was nearby. It was a silent war, a way of making it clear that the intruder was not welcome. In the afternoon, when the sun finally broke through the clouds, Eliza asked Effie for a bucket and a cloth. "I want to wash the floor of my room and the clothes the Baron lent me." Effie agreed, pleased with the young woman's attitude. As Eliza vigorously scrubbed the floor, she tried to put her thoughts in order. What did the future hold for her? Would she live on charity in that house, enduring the housekeeper's scornful glances until the day the Baron tired of her? The uncertainty was annoying anxiety. It was at that moment that the Baron returned. He entered through the back door, his boots muddy, his face marked by the sun and concern for the harvest. He stopped when he saw her there, on her knees cleaning the floor. Their eyes met for a brief second. He seemed surprised to see her working. He didn't have to do that. There are those who are paid for such tasks. Eliza jumped to her feet, her face flushing. "I just wanted to. Thank you, sir. To be useful." He observed her for a moment, his gaze unreadable. "Your son's name?" he asked, changing the subject. "Matthew," she replied, her voice low. "Matthew?" he repeated, the name sounding strange in his mouth. "Effie told me he's doing better." "Yes, sir. Thanks to you." An awkward silence settled between them. He was a coffee baron, one of the richest men in the region. She was a young woman with no name or place. A chasm separated them. "Continue with your work, then," he said at last, his voice formal again, and walked away towards his study. Eliza felt a pang of disappointment. Was this the same man who had saved her from the storm? The distance he imposed was like a bucket of cold water. She realized, with painful clarity, that her presence in that house was, and perhaps always would be, an act of charity, a constant reminder of her condition. That afternoon, as the sun dried the earth outside, Eliza felt that a new storm, silent and internal, was just beginning to form. She was no longer in the mud, but the ground beneath her feet still seemed dangerously unstable. The days that followed at Oakwood Manor dragged on in a routine of silences and chores. Eliza tried to be invisible, a shadow moving between the kitchen, the laundry, and the small back room. She woke before the sun, helped Effie prepare breakfast for the field workers, washed piles of clothes in the stone basin by the stream, and, between tasks, cared for Matthew with a devotion that moved the cook's kind soul. The little one, now well fed and warm, was a calm baby, who only cried when hunger pinched. He was the center of Eliza's universe, the only reason she endured Mrs. White's cutting glances and the Baron's calculated indifference. Arthur, in turn, seemed to regret his impulse of compassion. He plunged into work with renewed ferocity, spending his days on horseback, inspecting the coffee plantations, and his nights locked in his study, poring over account books. He came down for meals, which were served in the immense dining room, and ate in silence, responding with monosyllables to MRs, White's attempts at conversation. He and Eliza barely crossed paths. When it happened, he would only nod, a formal, distant gesture, and she would lower her eyes, her heart beating a little faster. It was as if an invisible wall had been erected between them after that first night. But her presence, however discreet, began to subtly change the atmosphere of the house. The sound of Matthew's laughter, a high-pitched, happy babble when Eliza played with him, echoed through the silent corridors. The younger maids, Lucy and Annie, grew fond of the young woman and the baby, and always found a pretext to peek at the little one and exchange a few words with his mother. Only Mrs. White remained unyielding. The housekeeper saw in Eliza a threat to the order she so painstakingly maintained. To her, the young woman was an opportunist, a fallen woman who used false innocence to take advantage of her employer's kindness. And she did not keep her suspicions to herself. She began a campaign of silent defamation, sowing discord with venomous comments disguised as concern. "Poor Baron, he has too kind a heart. He doesn't see people's malice," she would say in the kitchen. While Eliza was in the laundry, this young woman appeared out of nowhere with a very poorly told story. Who guarantees she didn't run away from somewhere, or that this child isn't the fruit of some great sin she wants to hide? The words were like small drops of poison, meant to slowly tarnish Eliza's image. Effie always reprimanded her, but the seed of doubt, once planted, is hard to uproot. Arthur was not deaf. He heard the whispers, perceived the tension in the air. A part of him, the pragmatic and suspicious part that the business world had taught him, wondered if White might not be right. After all, he knew nothing about Eliza, except her name and the tragedy she carried in her eyes. Therefore, he kept his distance. It was a way to protect himself, not to get more involved than he already was. But another part of him, the one that remembered the helplessness on her face in the rain, could not simply send her away. So, he observed, from afar, but he observed. One afternoon, a strong gust of wind, a harbinger of more rain, began to blow. The clothes drying on the line were torn off and scattered across the yard. Eliza, with Matthew tied to her body in a cloth, ran to collect them before the rain arrived. One of the Baron's horses, the black stallion named Corisco, was startled by a white sheet that flew in its direction. The animal reared, whinnying loudly, and bolted across the yard, heading directly for where Eliza was crouching. It all happened very quickly. Lucy screamed from the kitchen window. Eliza, turning and seeing that mass of muscle and fury coming towards her, was paralyzed by panic. Her only instinct was to bend over her son, turning her own body into a shield. She closed her eyes, awaiting the impact. But it didn't come. Instead, she felt a pair of firm hands grabbing her shoulders and pulling her aside forcefully at the last second. It was Arthur. He had seen the scene from his study window and had rushed down the stairs. He held her against him for an instant, her body trembling uncontrollably. His heart pounded wildly in his chest, a mixture of adrenaline and of fear he hadn't felt in years. "Are you all right?" His voice was a hoarse whisper near her ear. Eliza could only nod, her face buried in his chest. His scent, a mix of tobacco, leather, and earth, enveloped her. She could feel the warmth and strength of his arms around her. It was an embrace of protection, not charity. For a brief moment, the wall between them collapsed. She allowed herself to feel the relief, the security of that touch. He, in turn, felt her fragility, her small, trembling body, and the need to protect her became something physical, undeniable. The moment was broken by the sound of one of the ranch hands, who managed to lasso Corisco and calm the animal. Arthur pulled away slightly, but his hands remained on her shoulders, as if to make sure she wouldn't collapse. "That was close," he said, his voice still tense. "Thank you," she whispered, finally looking up at him. Their eyes met, and for the first time, there was no distance or formality, only the raw emotion of what had just happened. Mrs. White, who had also appeared at the door, saw the entire scene. She saw the way the Baron held the young woman, the concern etched on his face, and hatred, pure and corrosive, consumed her. That, for her, was the final proof. The intruder was not just seeking shelter. She was trying to steal the place that, by right of loyalty and years of service, White felt was hers, the center of attention and power in that house. That very night, the housekeeper acted. She knew that rumors in the kitchen were not enough. She needed something stronger, something that would poison the well once and for all. She waited until everyone was asleep and went to the estate chapel, a small, sacred place where the Baron's late wife used to pray. With hands trembling with rage, she took a small silver brooch with a pearl, one of the few jewels that Baroness Helen had left behind and that were kept as relics. She returned to the house in silence and, with the cunning of a serpent, hid the brooch among Eliza's few belongings, inside a cloth bundle stored under her bed. The plan was simple and cruel. The next day, she would accuse the outsider of theft, and then the Baron, no matter how much compassion he felt, would have no choice but to expel her. The honor of his late wife's memory was the only thing he valued more than his own word. The next morning began with a tension that could be cut with a knife. Us. White orchestrated her play with calculated precision. She waited until Arthur was in his study, after breakfast, to start the commotion. She entered the room in tears, a loud, rehearsed cry that made the Baron jump from his chair. "What happened, White? What is this uproar?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "It's an outrage, sir. A desecration." She sobbed, her face red. "The pearl brooch, the late Mrs. Helen's brooch. It's gone. It disappeared from the chapel." Arthur's face hardened. That brooch was one of the few physical mementos he kept of his wife. He himself had given it to her on their first wedding anniversary. "Are you sure? Did you look properly?" "I looked everywhere, sir. I clean it every week. It was there yesterday." Today, when I went to light the candles, it was gone. Someone stole it." She paused dramatically, wiping away fake tears with a handkerchief. "And I can only think of one person. Someone who has nothing to lose. Who has no respect for this house or the memory of our beloved mistress." Eliza's name was not spoken, but it hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Arthur felt a wave of anger at the accusation, but also a pang of doubt. He didn't want to believe it, but the cold logic White presented was treacherous. He strode to the kitchen, where Eliza was helping Effie prepare lunch. Oblivious to the storm brewing. "Eliza, come with me to the study." Now his voice was harsh, devoid of any warmth. Eliza trembled at his tone. She exchanged a startled look with Effie and followed him, her heart pounding in her chest. In the study, Mrs. White was already there, standing like a statue of justice. "A valuable object has gone missing from the chapel." Arthur went straight to the point. "A brooch that belonged to my late wife." He stared at her, his grey eyes piercing her. "Do you know anything about this?" The shock of the accusation left Eliza speechless. "Me? No, sir. I swear. I barely leave the kitchen and my room. I don't even know where the chapel is." "A thief never confesses, sir," White interrupted, her voice full of venom. "Search her room. I'm sure the proof of the crime is there." Eliza felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "Search my room? Why?" "I didn't do anything." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of humiliation and panic. She looked at Arthur, silently begging him to believe her. The Baron was torn. Searching someone's belongings was a violation, something he abhorred. But the accusation was serious and involved Helen's memory. If he did nothing, he would seem weak or worse, complicit. With a clenched jaw, he gestured to White. "Go. And be quick." The housekeeper left with a barely disguised smile of triumph. Eliza remained there, standing in the middle of the study, feeling naked and helpless under Arthur's cold gaze. Every second of waiting was torture. Effie, who had heard everything from the kitchen, ran to Eliza's room, her heart in her hands, but arrived too late. Mrs. White returned minutes later, the pearl brooch gleaming in the palm of her hand. "Here it is, sir. Exactly as I said." Hidden among her rags, under the bed, the sight of the brooch was like a punch to Eliza's stomach. It was impossible. How had it gotten there? She looked from White to Arthur, her mouth open, but no sound came out. The trap was perfect. Anything she said would sound like a desperate lie. I don't know how this," she finally stammered, her voice choked with tears. "I've never seen that jewel in my life. It was her. She put it there. What nonsense. Do you think the Baron will believe the word of a tramp over mine? I have served this family since before you were born, sir," White retorted, victorious. Arthur took the brooch. The cold metal in his hand was a painful reminder. He looked at Eliza, her face devastated by pain and disbelief. He saw the despair in her eyes, but he also saw the irrefutable evidence in front of him. Logic and emotion waged a brutal battle within him. His loyal housekeeper of a lifetime against an outsider he barely knew. The choice seemed obvious. "Pack your things," he said, his voice hollow, devoid of emotion. "I want you off my property by noon." The words struck her like whips. Eliza's world collapsed. After everything, after that brief moment of safety in his arms the day before, she was being thrown back into the mud. And this time, it hurt 1,000 times more. "Please, sir, don't do this. For my son, believe me," she pleaded, falling to her knees, the last vestige of pride abandoned. "Get up," he ordered, his voice even colder, for the sight of her kneeling was breaking him inside. "The decision is made." At that moment, Effie entered the study, her face bathed in tears. "Sir, with all due respect, this is an injustice. This girl is honest. I'd vouch for her. Mrs. White has always hated her from the first day." "Enough. Effie, go back to the kitchen," Arthur growled. "The matter is closed." Defeated, Eliza stood up. The crying stopped. In its place, a chilling calm took over her. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked directly at the Baron. The plea in her eyes gave way to wounded dignity. "You can expel me from your house, Baron, but you cannot call me a thief. I stole nothing. May God be my witness." She turned and left the study with her head held high, leaving behind a heavy silence, laden with doubt and remorse. Arthur stood still, the brooch in his hand, his gaze lost. He had done what his position and logic demanded. But, deep in his soul, an uneasy voice whispered that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had heard Eliza's words, but it was the dignity in her gaze that struck him deeply. And for the first time, he looked at Mars, White, and, instead of loyalty, saw only the ugly gleam of triumph in her eyes. The seed of doubt, previously planted against Eliza, now began to sprout against his most faithful housekeeper. Eliza walked back to her room like an automaton. Each step was heavy, as if her feet were stuck in the same mud from which she had been rescued. The Baron's words echoed in her mind, "Leave my property." Hope, that small flame that had begun to flicker in her chest, had been extinguished with a cruel breath. She picked up Matthew, who was sleeping peacefully in the basket, and hugged him tightly, his little face against her neck. He was all she had. Again, she began to gather her few belongings, the old clothes she arrived in, the wool blanket Effie had given her for the baby. Her fingers touched the clean skirt and blouse she was wearing, the estate clothes. With a decisive gesture, she took them off, putting on her wet and dirty rags, which had not yet dried completely. She would take nothing from that place, not a crumb of charity that could be used to accuse her later. Effie entered the room, her face swollen from crying. She carried a cloth bundle. "Take this, my dear. A little bread, cheese, and a fruit. You can't go out there on an empty stomach." Eliza shook her head. "I can't accept, Effie. Thank you for everything, for your kindness, but I can't. This isn't charity, it's care," the cook insisted, pushing the bundle into her hands. "And take this too." She pulled a small wool shawl from her apron pocket. "It's old, it was mine, but it will keep the boy warm. Go with God, Eliza, and may He open your path." The two embraced, a quick, tight hug, full of unspoken words. With Matthew in her arms and the small bundle in her hand, Eliza crossed the kitchen without looking at anyone. She passed through the porch of the main house and began to walk along the long dirt road that led to the main gate. The midday sun was strong, the sky a clear blue, mocking the darkness in her soul. She didn't look back. She didn't want to see the windows of the house, nor the man who had welcomed her and then condemned her without a fair trial. Meanwhile, in the study, Arthur could find no peace. He paced back and forth, the pearl brooch still in his hand. Effie's words, the dignity in Eliza's gaze, the satisfaction on White's face, the pieces didn't fit. Why would Eliza, who was content with so little and worked so hard, risk everything for an object she couldn't even sell without raising suspicion? And why had White, always so discreet, made such a spectacle? He sat at his desk, his head in his hands. The image of Eliza, on her knees, pleading, haunted him. He'd acted like a judge, cold and implacable. But now he felt like an executioner. His eyes wandered around the room and landed on Lucy, the youngest maid, who was dusting furniture in the hallway, trying not to make a sound. She looked scared, casting furtive glances into the study. "Lucy, come in here," he ordered, his voice softer than he intended. The young woman entered, twisting the dustcloth in her hands, her eyes downcast. "Are you afraid of me, girl?" he asked. "No, sir. Not at all," she stammered. "Then look at me." She obeyed, her eyes wide and frightened. "You like Eliza, don't you?" Lucy nodded, biting her lip. "She's a good person, sir, kind-hearted. Do you think she's capable of stealing?" The question hung in the air. Lucy swallowed hard, fear battling loyalty. She looked at the door, as if to make sure Mrs. White wasn't nearby. "Sir, I shouldn't meddle where I'm not called, but Mrs. White, she never liked Eliza, from the first day. And last night I saw something." Arthur's heart leaped. "What did you see? Speak, girl. Don't be afraid. You have my word that nothing will happen to you." Taking a deep breath, Lucy recounted. "I couldn't sleep. The wind was howling. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. As I was coming back, I saw Mrs. White leaving the chapel. I thought it was strange given the hour. She was tiptoeing, as if she didn't want to be seen. And she was holding something small in her hand, something that glittered in the moonlight." The revelation struck Arthur like lightning. Everything made sense. White's certainty, the rehearsed crying, the miraculous discovery of the brooch. It had all been a setup, a cruel and calculating setup. A cold fury took hold of him. Fury at White, for her betrayal and malice, but mainly fury at himself, for having been so blind, for having believed the lie and condemned an innocent woman. He didn't say another word to Lucy. He simply stood up, the chair scraping loudly on the floor, and strode out of the study. He found Moz, White in the dining room, supervising the setting of the table for lunch, an air of forced normality on her face. "White," he called her, his voice low and dangerous. She turned, an obsequious smile on her lips. "Yes, sir." "Where were you last night?" "After everyone went to bed." The question caught her by surprise. The color drained from her face. I was in my room, sir. As always. Don't lie to me." He took a step forward, his tall figure casting a shadow over her. "Lucy saw you leaving the chapel, with the brooch in your hand." Panic seized the housekeeper's eyes. She tried to deny it, stammered, but guilt was plastered across her face. The mask of loyalty crumbled, revealing the bitter and envious woman underneath. "How could you?" Arthur's voice was a whisper, laden with contempt. "How could you use my wife's memory for such a low act of malice? To tarnish the name of a defenseless young woman? Why, that woman was a threat." She finally exploded, her voice shrill. "You looked at her differently. She was going to take my place, the place I built in this house, with the sweat of my brow for 30 years. I did what was necessary to protect this family. To protect you, sir." "Protect me from what? From a little kindness? From an act of decency?" He laughed, a humorless laugh. "You protected nothing. You destroyed. Pack your things, White, all of them, and get out of my sight. I never want to see your face on my property again. Never." The order, the same one he had given Eliza, now sounded completely different. For White, it was the end of her world. She collapsed into a chair, her face contorted by defeat. But Arthur felt no pity. He turned and ran out of the house. The midday sun was already high. Eliza must have been far away by now. He ran to the stable, shouted for a stable boy to saddle Corisco, the fastest horse he had. He mounted in a leap and galloped down the road, raising a cloud of dust. Remorse whipped him harder than the wind. He needed to find her. He needed to mend the terrible mistake he had made. He needed to ask for forgiveness, even if he didn't deserve it. The image of her, walking alone under the strong sun with her son in her arms, was a torture he didn't know if he could bear. The dirt road seemed endless. For Eliza, each step was an act of will. The strong sun scorched her skin, and the weight of Matthew in her arms, once a comfort, was now a burden her tired muscles could barely support. She had no destination. She just walked, driven by the inertia of despair, moving away from the only place that had offered her shelter recently. The ox carts that passed her raised clouds of dust, and the drivers looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. A woman alone, with a baby in her arms, on the road, was always a sign of trouble. She stopped in the shade of an old oak tree, the tree that gave the manor that had expelled her its name. She sat on an exposed root, her body exhausted. She opened the bundle Effie had given her. The sight of the bread and cheese made her stomach rumble, but the humiliation was still so recent that it took away her hunger. Even so, she forced herself to eat a piece, thinking of milk for Matthew. As she ate, the tears she had held back with so much effort began to roll silently. They were not tears of self-pity, but of anger. Anger at the injustice, at the ease with which she had been judged and condemned, and anger at herself for having allowed a small flame of hope to ignite. Life had already taught her that hope was a luxury for others. Suddenly, she heard the sound of hooves, a horse, coming at high speed. Her first instinct was fear. She gripped Matthew tighter and huddled against the tree trunk, trying to become invisible. The sound grew louder, closer, and then the horse stopped abruptly a few feet from her. The dust settled, and she saw the rider. It was him, the Baron. Arthur dismounted in a leap, his face covered in sweat and dust, his breathing ragged. He looked at her, and the expression in his eyes was not anger or contempt, but something she couldn't identify. It seemed a mixture of urgency and pain. "Eliza," he said, his voice hoarse. She didn't answer. She just stared at him, her chin raised, her eyes dry, despite the tear tracks on her face. She wouldn't give him the pleasure of seeing her cry again. He took a step forward, then another, slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "I know everything. I know it was White's setup," she confessed. The revelation did not bring the relief he might have expected. For Eliza, it only confirmed the depth of the injustice. "And you believed her," she stated, her voice cold, emotionless. It wasn't a question. Those words hit him like a punch. "Yes," he admitted, his voice low, full of shame. "I was a fool, blind, and I made a terrible mistake. I came to ask you to come back." Eliza let out a short, humorless laugh. "Come back? For what? To be living proof of the Baron's charity. So everyone knows that you are so good that you even forgive the thief who, after all, wasn't a thief." "No, thank you. I prefer the open road. It's not out of charity," he insisted, his voice laden with desperate sincerity. "It's for justice. What I did was unforgivable. I sent White away. Her place at the manor is empty. But yours, your place is too. The house has been quieter, sadder, since you left." He paused, realizing he was saying more than he planned. "Come back, Eliza. Please. Not for me, but for Matthew. He needs a roof over his head, security. The road is no place for a child." The argument struck her where it hurt most. She looked at her son, who slept in her lap, oblivious to everything. He was right. Her anger and wounded pride could not put Matthew's life at risk, but to go back to that house, to that man, it felt like a surrender. "I don't want your pity, Baron," she said, her voice softer now, but still firm. "It's not pity, it's respect," he replied, his eyes fixed on hers. You faced me with a dignity I didn't deserve. You taught me a lesson. Let me try to mend the wrong I did. Come back to Oakwood Manor, not as a dependent, but as part of the household. You can help Effie, or if you prefer, you can teach the children of the estate to read. Many of them don't even know how to write their own name. You can have your own space, your own livelihood, with dignity. The offer surprised her. To teach reading. It was something she knew how to do. Her mother had taught her. It was real work, a purpose. She would no longer be the shadow that crept through the kitchen. She would be the teacher. The idea was tempting. It gave her status, a role that would place her above whispers and judgments. She watched him for a long time. She saw the genuine remorse on his face, the exhaustion in his posture. He'd galloped all the way there, under the strong sun, to find her. He didn't have to do that. He could have simply dismissed White and moved on with his life. The fact that he had come after her meant something. The children, she began, her voice hesitant. Would they want to learn from someone like me? They will learn from whoever teaches them with patience and kindness, he replied. And I know you have both. Silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was a silence of negotiation, of a new agreement being sealed without words. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the entire weight of her short life, she nodded. For my son, I'll come back. Visible relief washed over Arthur. He extended his hand to help her up. She hesitated for a second before accepting. His touch was firm and warm. He helped her onto the horse, seating her sideways in front of him, and then mounted behind. He put an arm around her to hold the reins, his body forming a protective shield against the wind. Eliza, with Matthew safe in her arms, huddled. Being so close to him was disconcerting. She could feel his breath in her hair, the warmth of his chest against her back. As Corisco made his way back to the manor, at a slow and careful trot, Eliza felt a confusion of emotions. She was returning to the place of her greatest humiliation, but not as the same person. Something had changed. She was no longer the frightened outsider. She had been accused, expelled, and called back. And in the process, she had discovered a strength within herself she didn't know she possessed. The man behind her was not the same either. The cold and distant Baron had given way to a man who admitted his mistakes and sought redemption. The road back to Oakwood Manor was the same, but for both of them, the path ahead was completely new and unknown. Time at the manor flowed at its own pace, marked by harvests, rains, and the silent growth of things. Months passed since the confrontation on the porch. Matthew was no longer a baby in arms. He crawled with impressive speed throughout the house, his laughter echoing through the corridors and filling the place with a liveliness not seen in ages. Eliza flourished in her role as a teacher. The children adored her, and even their parents, initially suspicious, now treated her with a respect and affection that warmed her soul. She found her place, her voice, and the shadow of the frightened young woman who had arrived in the storm gradually dissipated, giving way to a confident and serene woman. The relationship between her and Arthur evolved into a silent and deep friendship. Formalities naturally faded away. He began to have his meals at the large kitchen table with her and Effie, instead of eating alone in the dining room. They talked about daily life, about the students' progress, about the manor's problems. These were simple, mundane conversations, but they built a bridge of intimacy between them. He enjoyed listening to her speak, seeing the passion in her eyes when she told him about a child who had learned to put syllables together. She, in turn, learnt to read his concerns in the lines on his forehead, to understand his silences. There was a complicity in the air, a subtle tension that both felt but neither dared to address. It was a feeling as delicate as a spider web, which could break at the slightest false move. Arthur was still the Baron, the widower who guarded his wife's memory as a sacred treasure. And Eliza was the single mother, the woman he had rescued from the mud. The social chasm between them still existed, and the scars of their pasts made them cautious. But the heart has its own rules, and it betrays itself in small gestures. On a cold June night, during the Midsummer festival, the manor was celebrating. A large bonfire was lit in the courtyard, and the workers and their families squared to the sound of a fiddle. Eliza, with Matthew in her lap, watched everyone's joy from a distance, a melancholic smile on her lips. She didn't feel part of it. She still saw herself as a spectator. Arthur watched her from afar for a while. He wasn't a man for parties, but that night he couldn't stay in his study. Something pulled him outside. With a sudden decision, he walked over to her. "Aren't you going to dance?" he asked, his voice a little louder to overcome the music. She was startled. "Me? No, sir, I don't dance well. And I have Matthew. Effie can take him for a moment," he said, already signaling to the cook, who came smiling and took the boy. Before Eliza could protest, he extended his hand to her. "Come, I'm not a great dancer either. At least we won't be embarrassed alone." The invitation was so unexpected, so out of character for the austere Baron, that Eliza didn't know how to refuse. Hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. His hand was large and rough from work, and it enveloped hers with a firmness that sent a shiver through her. He led her closer to the bonfire, where couples whirled. The music was lively, and he guided her with surprising confidence. At first she was tense, stiff, afraid of missing a step, but he smiled at her. A genuine smile that lit up his face and softened his features. "Just follow the music," he said close to her ear. And she did. She relaxed in his arms, let herself be carried away by the rhythm, by the contagious joy of the festival. As they danced, spinning around the bonfire, the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces, the world seemed to shrink and be reduced to that moment. Their eyes met, and in them was a silent conversation, a confession that their lips dared not make. For the first time, they were not the Baron and the dependent. They were just a man and a woman, sharing a moment of rare and unexpected happiness. When the music ended, they stood still for an instant, still close, their breathing a little heavy. The awareness of what had just happened, of the barrier they had crossed, hung between them. He slowly, reluctantly, let her go. "Thank you for the dance," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "Thank you," she replied, lowering her eyes, her face flushed. The magic of the moment was broken. They returned to the shadow of the porch, took Matthew back from Effie, who looked at them with an air of knowing something, and the night continued. But nothing was the same. That dance, that simple act of shared joy, had changed everything. It had awakened a feeling that both had been trying to suppress, a feeling that was, at once, wonderful and terrifying. That night, lying in her bed, Eliza couldn't sleep. She recalled the touch of his hand, the warmth of his body, the sound of his voice in her ear, and she felt fear. Fear of allowing herself to feel something for a man from a world so different from hers. Fear of the pain that would inevitably come when reality reasserted itself. Arthur, in his room, was also awake. He looked at Helen's portrait on the wall, the woman he had loved so much. For 7 years he had lived in the past, believing his heart had died with her. But that night, dancing with Eliza, he felt alive in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. And guilt gnawed at him. Would it be a betrayal of Helen's memory to allow himself to love again? Or would it perhaps be the only way to honor the life they could not have had together? The bonfire outside slowly extinguished, but within him a new flame, confused and powerful, had just been kindled. The dance at the Midsummer Festival broke an invisible barrier. In the following days, an awkward shyness replaced the old complicity between Arthur and Eliza. They retreated, frightened by the intensity of what they felt. The routine was broken by the arrival of a messenger with a letter for Eliza. The trembling handwriting announced what her heart already knew. Her father, Ignatius, was dying and asked to see her. Hurt battled duty, but she decided to go. Arthur, with a firmness that brooked no refusal, insisted on taking her. The journey was made in dense silence. Her father's house was a picture of defeat, smelling of loneliness and illness. Ignatius, a shadow of the man he had been, wept upon seeing her. With a last breath, he asked for forgiveness and handed her a letter, a secret from her late mother. He died, holding the hand of the daughter he had disowned. After a simple burial, already on the return journey, Eliza finally opened the envelope. Her mother's letter revealed a shocking truth. The small property and a dowry kept in a bank in the capital were hers by right. She was not destitute. She had the means to leave, to be free. That night, at an inn, she showed the letter to Arthur. "I can leave," she said, her voice a mixture of astonishment and pain. The possibility of losing her struck Arthur like a physical blow. He held her face, forcing her to look at him. "Forget the letter, Eliza. What does your heart want to do?" The question hung between them, heavier than the night itself. "My heart wants, for the first time, not to depend on anyone," Eliza replied, her voice trembling. "This letter gives me the chance to be mistress of my own path. How can I give that up?" Arthur felt the weight of those words. Her freedom was his sentence. With a nobility that cost him dearly, he stepped back. "If leaving is your choice, I will help you," he said, his voice firm, hiding his own pain. The following days at Oakwood Manor were a silent torture. While Eliza wrestled with the decision, Arthur, true to his word, moved his contacts to secure her future far from there. The farewells seemed increasingly real, a chasm opening between them. The resolution came on a rainy afternoon, an echo of the day they met. He found her on the porch, watching the water that had once brought her to him. Without saying a word, he took from his pocket the small silver locket that had belonged to his wife. "This was Helen's," he said, his voice choked. "The past should not be an anchor, Eliza. There are loves that time does not erase, but there are others that it sends us to heal." He placed the locket in her hand. It was not a request to replace his late wife, but an invitation to a new beginning. Eliza's tears mingled with the fine drizzle that blew on the porch. She finally understood. Freedom was not in a piece of paper or a purse of coins. "My home is here," she whispered, holding his hand tightly. "My freedom is you." He pulled her into an embrace that healed all wounds. Under the same rain that united them, they did not seal a contract, but a silent promise of a new start. So, did you enjoy following Eliza and Arthur's journey? Stories like this remind us that life can be full of twists and turns, but strength and dignity always find a way. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories. Give us a like to let me know you enjoyed it, and most importantly, comment below what you liked most about this ending. Your feedback is what keeps us going. A big hug and see you next time.